Hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar. This is Jay Donlin, Acting President of the Recognition Council. The Recognition Council is pleased to host today's panel discussion on a very important topic for anyone who utilizes recognition or incentives as an effective business strategy, the possible elimination of tax provision 274J. Here's what you can expect from today's session. A thorough exploration of the industry's efforts in Washington, D.C., interactive learning with surveys and live questions, and we'll really look for you to participate in today's session. And then also how you can have a voice in Washington, how you can be heard as well. At this time, I'd like to introduce Tracy Hodge from IMA, who will help us with webinar logistics and participation. Tracy?
Thank you, Jay. Before we get started with our presentation, we would like to go over a few housekeeping items regarding today's web event. You can easily minimize or maximize the control panel or view the webinar in full screen or window mode with the tab on the left side of the control panel. And you can move that tab by clicking the top of it and dragging it out of the way. Next slide, please. The audio pane of the control panel is where you indicate if you are calling in on the phone or using a headset or mic and speakers. If you select Use Telephone, it will show you the dial-in number, access code, and PIN that you will need to access the webinar. Please make sure that you enter your audio PIN so that you can ask questions and we can help you if needed. If you're using a headset or computer speakers, select Use Mic and Speakers. And if you are having any trouble, click on the audio setup link to help you. Next slide. During the presentation, all attendees are muted, but you do have the ability to send questions to our webinar staff through the questions pane. Simply type in your question and click send. We will be answering your questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to submit your questions at any time. We will also have a few poll questions throughout the presentation to get your opinion or perspective. When you see a poll question pop up, you only have a few seconds to make your selection before the results are revealed, so click on your best answer quickly to be counted. As a final reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on the IMA and the Recognition Council websites very soon. Now I'd like to turn the presentation back over to you, Jay.
Thank you, Tracy. And now I'd like to introduce our facilitator from the Incentive Federation Board of Directors, Michelle Smith. Welcome, Michelle.
Thanks, Jay, and thanks to the Recognition Council for the invitation to do this webinar. Certainly this is a part of the value of being an IMA and a Recognition Council member is to have access to free education and updates and information like this webinar. So we're very pleased to be doing this for the Recognition Council. And we have a partner here. The Recognition Council is partnering with the Incentive Federation to conduct this webinar, and we have a distinguished panel from the Federation who will be helping us and sharing their insights with us about everything that's going on in Washington. You're going to learn more about the Incentive Federation from our chairman of the Federation in just a minute. But let me take a moment just to tell you a bit about myself. I'm not going to go through the whole bio here, but I'm very privileged to be working for the O.C. Tanner Company as the Vice President of Business Development. O.C. Tanner has been a member of the Recognition Council since it was formed, and we actually were quite active in helping to create it. And personally, I'm involved in a lot of associations and boards, like the Incentive Marketing Association. I was president in 2007, and the Forum for People Performance at Northwestern. I was president there in 08 and 09. But most pertinent to today's discussion is, as Jay said, I sit on the Federation board, and I chair the Legislative Awareness Committee. And that clearly is the committee that is central to our strategic plan for how we approach our legislative protection and advocacy in Washington. I've made several trips to Washington over the last couple of years to advance the Federation and the industry's interests, whether we're advocating for new legislation or defending 274. So we're all quite passionate about the topic of 274J, and I'm sure that'll come across today in our presentation. And before I introduce you to our very special panel, let me just explain a little bit further about our agenda today. We're going to have our panelists cover these 4 questions, which we really feel is central to you on having a good understanding of what is happening with the incentive legislative campaign. You know, why is 274J and our programs in jeopardy? What is going to be the impact for you and your clients? What obstacles do we face? And how you can get involved and you can help with that effort. Each of the panelists is going to give just a brief overview to cover various aspects of these questions. As Jay mentioned, we really want this to be informal and interactive, and we invite your questions throughout the presentation. So we will be monitoring those questions, as Tracy mentioned, and we will respond to them. So if there's anything that's not clear, please don't be bashful about sending in a question or a comment as well that will be helpful to the discussion. And also, as Tracy mentioned, we're going to be asking your opinion on issues throughout the webinar as well. So with that foundation under our belt, let's go ahead and meet our panel. I'm very, very, very pleased, as is Jay, that we have the power duo of the incentive industry and certainly our efforts in Washington here with us today. Karen Rank and George Delta, I know those are names very, very familiar to all of you, or they should be if they're not, and they've joined us today. So I know you're familiar with them, but I'd like each of them to take a moment as well to tell you a little bit more about themselves as well before we get into the meat of the presentation. So ladies first, Karen.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is a very important topic, and we very much appreciate your interest. I believe that most of you probably know me as the Executive Director of the Incentive Marketing Association, and in that capacity I also work with all of our 8 strategic industry groups, and so I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work with many of you. I also have been a member of the Board of Directors of the Incentive Federation, and I am currently the chair of the Incentive Federation, and I've actually been involved in that in the capacity of being a director since 1986. George?
And I'm George Delta. I've been involved with the Incentive Federation since 1990, or around 1990. I've been legal counsel for the Federation and have helped out with executive director duties from time to time. I've spent a good part of my time working to represent the incentive rewards and recognition marketplace in our nation's capital. We've been fairly active on various legislative fronts over the last 20-plus years that I've been involved. Specifically, we've been working on sweepstakes legislation. We've been working on safety rulemaking before OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. We've been working also to make sure that incentives are not attacked again in the. Excuse me. The Federation was originally formed to fight the proposed ban of incentives in the financial marketplace, specifically mostly banking, and that was our initial success. And every so often, we are faced with opposition to the use of incentives in other industries. More recently, within the pharmaceutical industry, and the Federation's role is always to try to represent your interests as best we can, to try to make sure that legislators and private industries don't view incentives as a negative and don't try to either impose onerous regulations or even ban incentives from the marketplace.
George, can you, I think you bring up a good point, and for those in our audience who may not be terribly familiar with the Federation, since the Federation was key and very instrumental in actually the creation of 274J, can you speak a little bit about that and also the success that you kind of mentioned just very briefly about protecting the industry from onerous legislation? And I'm thinking specifically of a few years ago when OSHA tried to stop the use of safety incentive programs. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Since it's a discrete topic, I'll speak about OSHA first. In 2000, more or less out of the blue, OSHA issued a proposed rulemaking regarding injuries in the workplace. They called it the ergonomics rule. It was a rule that was intended to provide guidance on how employees were to avoid musculoskeletal disorders, I guess things like carpal tunnel syndrome, bad backs from poor lifting techniques and the like. And rather gratuitously, in the preamble to the proposed rule, there was a paragraph that said not only do safety incentives not work all in reducing injuries, they have no benefit whatsoever, but in fact, safety incentive programs are harmful because they lead inevitably to the underreporting of injuries. They came up with this preamble without any empirical evidence whatsoever. So when this came to our attention, we had to actually engage fast and furiously in a lobbying and education effort. We met through the Republican and the Democratic side on the Senate. Our champion at the time was Senator Harkin. We ended up meeting with the highest position we could possibly meet with, which was then the Secretary of Labor, Alexis Herman. And in the meantime, we ended up having several meetings with interested parties, such as the AFL-CIO, other senators, the late Senator Wellstone, Senator Kennedy, Senator Cornyn, and a few others to explain to, and on the House side, we ended up meeting with one person and one person only because at the time he was the only one that really mattered. It was Congressman DeLay. And through our efforts, through this educational process, we found out that the proposed paragraph that was put in there was done gratuitously to appease some of the labor unions who don't like incentive programs for a variety of reasons. And because of that, we ended up going through Senators Harkin, Kennedy, and Wellstone, who were champions of labor, and none of whom really needed to be convinced that incentives work. As a result of that, when the final ergonomic rule was enacted, OSHA backed off considerably from its position and said that it would not oppose safety incentive programs from being used to reduce workplace injuries. Indeed, it allowed how a well-designed program might actually be beneficial. Now, from those rather humble beginnings, going back to October, November 2000, we have engaged in a dialogue every couple of years or so, and sometimes more frequently, with OSHA, and we've been providing them some backup documentation in the form of studies, and we've been having a couple of our members meet with them formally or informally. And now OSHA's come around to the view that not only are safety incentive programs not harmful, but they, in fact, a well-designed safety incentive program is now viewed in a very positive light by OSHA. In that sense, recently when OSHA was looking into revising its rules again on workplace safety, they started out initially with the position that they were going to be neutral, and from being neutral, they moved fairly quickly to accepting the fact that safety incentive programs were actually very beneficial. So that is one of the ways the Federation works. Frankly, it works because we can get the ball rolling here in Washington, but it works because people in the marketplace, stakeholders, as OSHA and the Department of Labor calls them, namely incentive houses and businesses, step forward and provide compelling evidence that safety incentive programs work. And every so often, it's even better when you can round up some, as we have done in the past, when you can round up some employees to speak glowingly about safety incentive programs and how safety incentive programs work, how the safety incentive programs help them, and how these types of programs do not lead to underreporting of injuries in any way, shape, or form.
A key point here, George, is the fact that if the Incentive Federation had not been on guard and acted quickly, it was almost, as I recall, an overnight rally, that preamble would have stood with the very negative comment about safety programs. And if that had been the case, we certainly would not have seen the dramatic increase in the use of safety programs in the corporate community. And that has been a growing segment of the incentive and rewards arena.
Absolutely. And importantly, just to give you a little bit of anecdotal evidence of how the approach worked, when we ended up speaking with the late Senator Wellstone, who, if you remember, was a college professor, we went in there. Part of our sales pitch was that safety incentive programs work, and he looked at us and he says, "Well, who says they don't?" And I said, and we pointed to him the preamble to the important paragraph in the preamble to the rules that OSHA had drafted, and he looked at this and he says, "This doesn't make any sense." So once we got him on our side, and once then he went on to ask, where did they come up with this? Is there any empirical evidence? And then the folks at OSHA had to start backtracking because there was absolutely no empirical evidence whatsoever, zero, none. But that's a very important function that the Federation and, frankly, you all play. It's important for the Federation to find out what is happening in Washington, bring it to people's attention, but then we need the support of stakeholders in our industry, the important members of our industry, whether they be the incentive houses or whether they be businesses, to help us put forward our case. So that's very, very important, and it's a constant educational process. The proposed rule, I think, was published, I want to say February or March of 2000. Comments were due on it in 2 or 3 months, and the full rule.
George?
Did we lose George?
We may have.
We may have lost George.
I'm sure he'll call back in.
You can't hear me?
Oh, there. No, we didn't.
Now we can.
That's strange. Oh, well. Anyway, I'm sorry. I don't know how much of that you missed.
You just were starting to say the proposed ruling.
Oh, okay. The proposed rule was published in Federal Register, I believe, in March of 2000. Comments were due, I think, in 2.5 months, and the rule was finalized, I believe, in very early November. So sometimes when these things happen, if you're not watching out for them, they can happen very, very quickly. And it's important that the Federation and you all remain ever vigilant, ever active. Now, to move to something that is really more of the topic of this conversation and webinar, Section 274J is the Internal Revenue Code provision that gives preferential tax treatment to length of service awards and to safety incentive programs. The preferential tax treatment that these two programs receive is if they meet certain other guidelines of 74J. The incentive award, service award, are not taxable to the employee, the recipient, but they're deductible as an administrative cost for the employer. So you can see it's a very important tax benefit. On the one hand, you have no tax to the recipient. On the other hand, you have a tax deduction for the employer.
And George, let's get into that in just a bit. We'll get more into the absolute details of 274J. But thank you so much for that overview, and I think you're being very modest about the successes of the Federation, and that's why I wanted to make sure everyone knew that the Federation has been very dynamic, very active, and probably not tooting its own horn enough over the years of the near misses that we as an industry have felt, or you have protected us from feeling in the industry. And I think two real key points that you made there is that very oftentimes, and we've certainly found this to be true over and over again, things happen in Washington that aren't based on evidence, or the participants in the process aren't even aware of the full implications of what they're doing. And secondly, the need to be vigilant and to act quickly when you see something like that before it takes on a life of its own and it's too late to do anything about it. So we really appreciate that, and we are going to come back to the details of 274J in a big way in just a moment. But if I can just shift for a minute back to Karen to talk a little bit about her perspective of the Federation and the connection with IMA. And Karen, I believe you'd like to start with a poll question.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. So those of you who are on the line, please let us know how many of your organizations utilize or design or sell product into safety and/or length of service award programs. So that's utilizing those types of programs within your own organization, designing those types of programs for your clients, or selling product into or services into those programs. So if you could select your answers now, I would appreciate that. And Tracy, is that going to be coming up?
Yes, in just a second. I'm closing it now. Closing it
now.
Now.
While we're waiting for those poll results, one of the things that, well, we just received them, and 100% of you, not surprising since you've taken time out of your busy day to join us, but 100% of you are involved in a safety or length of service program in some way. And that's what's key here, because every member in the Incentive Marketing Association, and particularly those members of the Recognition Council, are in jeopardy, or their programs are in jeopardy, if 274J is eliminated in its entirety. George is going to talk on point about that, but I wanted to, as Michelle said, give you a perspective about the Incentive Federation. As you have just heard and may have already made the realization, the Incentive Federation is probably the best kept secret in the incentive marketplace. It's been working behind the scenes since 1984 to make sure that negative legislation is not enacted that would in any way harm the programs that you are selling to your clients or programs that you're selling into. IMA and all of our strategic industry groups are not lobbying organizations. As a matter of fact, by charter, we cannot directly lobby as the Incentive Marketing Association. And that is why our support of the Incentive Federation is so absolutely critical. The Incentive Federation has three primary purposes. One, of course, is lobbying. Two is education, and that's educating legislators about the benefits of the use of incentives as strategic business tools. And the third purpose is to develop industry-wide research. And you may recall that the last volume study conducted in the incentive marketplace that showed the size of the market in 2006 was more than $46 billion. That survey was funded by the Incentive Federation. Shortly after the OSHA situation that George just described, the leaders of the Incentive Federation noted that we really needed to have a more visible presence in Washington, D.C., and that we needed to be there even when there wasn't a crisis situation, so that when the next crisis would occur, we would have visibility and legislators would be aware of the benefits of our marketplace. We launched what it has now become the Incentive Legislative Campaign formally 2 years ago, but it was in the works for several years in terms of designing the strategy around it and, quite honestly, finding the funding for it. Through the Incentive Federation's normal operating expenses, we have been able to retain George Delta, who has been absolutely invaluable to us in interfacing with legislators for the last many years. And also, we have retained a professional lobbyist, Jim Miller, who has been, with George, the architect of our most recent campaigns to promote, first, the use of wellness programs, and then when the budget crisis occurred, we quickly shifted gears to defend 274J. As we said, George is going to speak to that very specifically, but I just wanted to speak to the point that the Incentive Federation is a consortium of organizations in the incentive marketplace and individual organizations such as yours. An effort of this nature, the lobbying effort, the legal advice, the data that has to be generated to make our case in Washington is an expensive proposition, and we're going to be letting you know how you can help us with this very, very crucial effort to our marketplace.
Thank you, Karen. And what the audience has been seeing while you've been giving that fantastic overview is a screenshot of the homepage of the Incentive Federation website. If you haven't been there before, we encourage the audience to take a look. And we're going to, Karen will share more of some of the parts of the website a little later in the webinar as well, but just to let you know what you were looking at there. So we will turn the tables back to George then to go into a deeper dive, as Karen mentioned, on this critically important topic of 274J, to talk about it in detail and how we got there. But George, I think you'd like to pose a poll question to our audience as well as a start.
Yes, you see the poll question that is popped up on the screen, and the question is, how familiar are you with the details of the Code Section 274J legislation?
And anybody who was listening, you gave kind of a couple of clues before, so we should have some strong results here in this poll.
So the winners are somewhat and not at all. Then let me give you a brief overview of Section 274J and how it came to be enacted back in 1986. Section 274J, as I alluded to a bit earlier, has two components to it. One is the length of service component, and the other is the Safety Achievement Awards component. And again, if the employer gives the employee merchandise, in other words, the award has to be tangible personal property, and that generally speaking means merchandise. It can't be tickets to a baseball game. It can't be tickets to the opera. It can't be a certificate to go to a restaurant and those types of things. But as long as the recipient receives merchandise, and the merchandise, the value of the merchandise does not exceed $400 in any given year, the maximum value of the award can be $1,600, but the average of all of the awards has to be $400. So if you give one award that's $1,600, 4 other recipients have to receive awards that are no more than $100 in value each, to average $400 per recipient. For safety awards, the awards can only be given up to 10% of the eligible workforce, which means your rank and file employees. That excludes part-time, it excludes independent contractors, and it also excludes management employees. So it can be given to up to 10% of the eligible workforce. For safety award for service awards, there is no 10% minimum, or maximum, but safety awards can only be given in 5-year increments. So an employee becomes eligible for a length of service award only after he or she has been with the employer for 5 years, and then every 5 years thereafter, so 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on. Another requirement of Section 274J is that both the safety awards and the service awards have to be given as part of a meaningful ceremony. I mean, that doesn't really require much, but it does require some recognition of the recipient as he or she is receiving the award. So that is basically the overview of the code provision, Section 274J. The important benefit is that as I said earlier, if you meet the definitional guidelines that are in Section 274J, the award is non-taxable to the employer, and it's deductible as an administrative expense to the, non-taxable to the employee, and deductible as an administrative expense by the employer. So it's one of those provisions that ends up being a win-win for the employer as well as for the employee. The code provision came into being in 1986 through the work of people in the incentive marketplace, businesses in the incentive marketplace, as well as the Incentive Federation. And it's very interesting that the provision was enacted in 1986, in that the legislative climate in 1986 had some similarities to today's legislative climate, in that Congress was enacting tax simplification. The Tax Reform Act of 1986 is probably the most comprehensive tax reform provision in my lifetime, at least since 1954 anyway. And that the most important achievement of the 1986 Tax Reform Act was to reduce the overall maximum tax bracket to 28%, eliminate the difference between capital gains and ordinary income. So whether you were selling stock or whether you were working, you were taxed at 28% regardless. That was the maximum tax rate. And Congress, in order to reduce the tax rate, working with then President Reagan and his Treasury Department, they worked very hard to eliminate what Congress is calling today tax expenditures, what were called back then loopholes. So if Congress was closing loopholes, it was lowering the overall maximum tax rate. It's surprising to some folks, but it's also very, very, very good for us. It's a very good indication for us that while Congress was eliminating tax expenditures and tax loopholes, they enacted this very important tax provision because it created a better, healthier, safer, and more motivated workforce. So there were certainly members of Congress back then who strongly believed that a motivated and a healthy and a recognized workforce would actually pay dividends. The other thing that helped us back then was the revenue loss for Section 274J was fairly small. It was under $500 million over 5 years. And for those of you who were smart enough not to know, when tax legislation is enacted, the revenue loss is scored by the Joint Tax Committee over a period of 5 years. The scoring only takes one thing into account, and the only thing it takes into account is if this particular piece of legislation is enacted, if this particular code provision becomes law, how much revenue will the Treasury lose? And that's all it looks like. It doesn't look at how many jobs will be created. It doesn't look at any multiplier effect in the economy. It doesn't look at anything else other than purely and simply how much less revenue will the government collect. So
George,
even
George,
with,
while you're,
sorry.
we have a question from, I promise, not a relative of mine.
I didn't see it. Yes, I see it.
Rory Smith would like to know.
I can't take a question from Rory.
You can't? Okay. Well,
no, certainly not.
Then I'll pose it for Rory.
No, I see the question. Go ahead, Michelle. You pose it, and then I'll answer it.
Do gift cards qualify for the tax breaks like merchandise? And if not, why not? And thank you, Rory, for your question.
Yes, thanks, Rory, and thanks for being muted so that you can't fight back. The answer to that is it depends. Gift cards can certainly, if gift cards are redeemable across the board for anything, so for example, if you can get a gift card and you can go to a store and have them repair your computer, for example, that gift card would not qualify for the tax preferential treatment because it's not redeemable for tangible personal property for merchandise only. A gift card can qualify as an award as a tax advantaged award under Section 274J if it's redeemable for merchandise only. So that's the main differentiation.
And George, you were talking about the legislation, and one of the things I've learned from you and from Jim Miller, our lobbyist, is that the Incentive Federation and those who worked together to get the legislation enacted did a phenomenal job not only in getting the legislation, but that it is a permanent tax break. Can you speak about that and how most tax benefits don't have that permanent status?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up, Michelle. In the upside-down world of Washington, because certain types of tax benefits can have a high cost associated with them, for example, the research and development tax credit, they are made temporary. In other words, they are renewed every 2 to 4 years. In the example of the R&D tax credit, it's usually renewed every 2 years, and sometimes they're even renewed. Congress may miss the window and renew it the following year and make it retroactive. So a lot of tax benefits only have a short window of life. That way, Congress doesn't have to score them for revenue loss over a period of 5 years, and it works much better with the congressional budgeting approach. We don't have that problem. When Section 274J was enacted in 1986, it was made a permanent part of the Internal Revenue Code, so we don't need any action from Congress or from Treasury or from the IRS to keep our tax benefit in place. What we would like is for them to leave us alone, frankly. And that's where, if this is okay, in a time, I'd like to segue into the current legislative environment. Namely, if you all have been reading the papers and you have noticed what's on the what's on the agenda in Congress, Simpson-Bowles piece of legislation.
Did we lose you again, George? The barking dog bit George.
Michelle, perhaps you could speak to Simpson-Bowles.
Sure. Let me, while we wait for George to come back, Simpson-Bowles is a commission that President Obama had asked and invited to look into tax reform well over a year ago, and headed up by former Senator Simpson and Bowles. And they spent the better part of a year looking at all of the various ways that we could bring our overall tax rate down to make us more competitive globally. And in November, they recommended that, in fact, the best way, one of the best ways to bring our tax rates down was to eliminate all of the current tax benefits and loopholes. Now, George said 274J, we're very blessed that it's permanent. It doesn't mean that Congress can't take it away. It just means it doesn't come up for regular review. So we are still very much at the behest of members of Congress, and there's a lot of momentum behind Simpson Bowles. Now, Obama did not go forward with Simpson Bowles in his budget for the year, but there are many, many fans of Simpson Bowles who still believe that's the best way to attack tax reform. And pretty much everyone in Washington, D.C. believes that tax reform will come. There was possibility that it might be addressed this year, but with the election, pretty much everyone is thinking that it won't be addressed before the election, but it will be topic number one and job number one come January of 2013. So we have a huge black cloud looming over our head about tax reform and what that could mean to not only our legislation, but obviously a lot of legislation, including your home mortgage deduction and other significant tax benefits that we as U.S. citizens can take advantage of. So this is why we are so concerned, because everyone is moving towards that conversation.
I'm sorry, there's a fire alarm. We've all been evacuated from, well, they're evacuating us from the building, so I don't know how this will work on my cell phone. I don't have my computer with me, so I apologize.
Well, you're sounding good, George, and I just went through Simpson Bowles and the looming tax reform and why we are concerned and at issue. So maybe this would be a good time. We'll move to your other poll question. And if you...
Do me a favor and read it, since I don't have my computer now.
Sure. The question is, and this is a biggie for us, so we're really anxious to get your feedback here. If 274J went away and service and safety awards became taxable to employees and also, of course, to employers, how do you think, you know, your own organizations for your own programs, or how do your clients for their programs, how do you think they would respond? Would they gross up? In other words, would companies pay the award, the taxable piece for their employees? Would companies reduce the award values by the amount of taxes and then gross up that award so their budget would remain the same? Would they maintain their current award values and have the employee pay the tax? Or do you think they would cancel their programs? So if you could please give us your response. And Karen, perhaps you can share what that poll is showing as far as a result.
Well, to George's point, the winner is B, that most of you feel that your clients would reduce the award values by the taxed amount and gross up the employee award. That was 43% of you. 29% felt that the clients would maintain their current award values and have the employee pay the taxes. 0% felt that they would gross up the award value to cover the award tax. And 29% felt that the client would simply cancel the program. And that is definitely too high of a figure. We don't want that to happen.
Absolutely, and that is clearly our biggest fear. You've probably gathered that from our conversation thus far. And even the 30, certainly the 30% who would have the programs remain the same is very encouraging. But 43% lowering the award values is certainly, we all know, going to impact the performance of the program. So on that note, let's change topics for just a moment a little bit. I want to take you through just a very quick overview of some of the other threats and opportunities about exactly who would be impacted, businesses, associations, et cetera, with 274J. But first, I want you to just take a moment and think about how much business you do in service awards or safety incentives, whether you're, as Karen mentioned earlier, supplying awards, whether you are an incentive or recognition company that provides those kinds of programs to your clients, your own programs, how much of an impact is that making in your organization, and what top line, bottom line revenue does that generate for your organization? And my point is, that's what would be in jeopardy if 274J went away. For an incentive or recognition house that does a lot of business in service and safety awards, it's a very ominous prospect. And clearly, that has a real possibility of cascading through the supply chain to all of those organizations who supply, gift cards and merchandise and awards for those programs, because if those programs go away, incentive and recognition companies are not going to be buying them. So just very quickly, because I know most of you are familiar with this, but as George alluded to, 274J has had a 25-year plus track record now of real success in helping with job creation, creating a safer workplace, improving productivity, improving our competitiveness in this country, in the global marketplace. And research has discovered that 86% of accidents are triggered by unsafe behavior. And that's a great thing when we know that the majority of that is preventable. So it's an ideal situation for an incentive program. And George spoke earlier about how OSHA really supports good, well-designed safety programs. Now the challenge is that if employers do in fact with 274J, if it goes away, and employees are left to pay the tax, some of those employees will have to, we've seen it happen in the past where employees actually sold the award to pay the tax, or they refused to accept the award. And you can just imagine how that just is going to blow up the effectiveness of a program if you've got employees burdened by the award or not wanting to accept the award. Likewise, if an employer is grossing up for the employee and covering the taxes, that's adding a 30 to 40% additional expense to the employer. And that's why we at the Federation are so fearful that employers will reduce the value of the award to make up that 30 to 40%, or they may really see it as an opportunity to have those programs go away completely. And that would be very, very detrimental to incentive and recognition companies. It would be detrimental to manufacturers, reps, channel partners, all of the people, award providers that support those programs. So if you are in the incentive industry, I promise you, you should care about 274J. And even if you don't have a direct link with the end user, it's highly likely that you will be impacted negatively. Not to mention that our economy and workforce is going to be very negatively impacted as well, with probably higher increases of accidents in workers' comp rates and project costs and things like that being increased at a time when we really just can't afford that kind of a burden, additional burden on employers. On the service award side, we know that service awards really help build the culture and build employee engagement. And again, going to the research, unequivocally, companies with engaged employers are far more productive. And you see the figures here: higher sales, higher profits, better customer loyalty, more productivity, improvement in market share, higher shareholder returns, and probably the two most important to our economic situation as a country right now is that companies with engaged workers grew 19%. They've been growing, and companies without engaged workers in that same period declined 30%. So that's a 49% differential. And nobody in any economy can afford that kind of differential, but especially in the very fragile economic state that we find ourselves. That can literally be the difference between a company continuing to exist and not existing anymore. And the additional good news is that Gallup has found that companies with engaged workers, with high morale and feeling very good in a healthy culture in their organization, those companies are also creating more jobs. And you hear the politicians say it all the time. It's the economy, it's jobs, jobs, jobs. And so we don't want anything to impact job creation negatively. And 274J is certainly been proven to be very helpful in that. And again, should it it is in jeopardy, should it go away, we worry that it opens the doors of not only service and safety programs, but for companies, and we know them because we've fought to educate them and change their minds over the years. There's companies who are not champions of recognition and incentives, but are doing programs kind of begrudgingly. And we all know them. We all have clients like that. And there's a genuine fear that we all should have that they would really see this opportunity to do away with, other kinds of incentive programs as well as this whole reshuffling. So we definitely don't want that to happen. And I'm going to also ask you, our final poll question here is, to what degree do you think your business or organization would be impacted, or your client's business be impacted, if in fact 274J goes away? Is it dramatically negative, somewhat negative, no impact, or if you're not sure, please vote accordingly. And again, Karen, I'd ask if you would kindly
Surely will. While we're waiting for those results, we did have a question, and that was, where can I find the actual tax code? George, is that posted on the Incentive Federation website?
The code provision? No. We can post it. It's about a page long. You can find it by Googling internal IRC section 274J, or we can certainly post it on our website.
I think, why don't we post it on the website, and we'll have that up by next week.
Sure.
Regarding the poll results, as I suspected, 58% of you feel that it would have the elimination of 274J would have a dramatically negative impact on your business. 25% felt that it would be somewhat negative, and 17% don't know. But none of you answered no impact, and I think that's the point here, is we don't know what the exact consequences will be, but we know that they will impact the use of length of service programs and safety programs in the corporate community.
Thank you, Karen, and I don't know if I'm excited or disappointed to see those poll results. It's just a validation of what we are concerned about and are feeling and continue to hear. So we certainly are feeling validated that our concern is genuine. And thanks, Ellen, for that question. And we will make sure that we get you that code and get it up on the website, because it's something that absolutely should be there. So as we're kind of reaching our final moments here, I do want to turn it back to Karen. We promised you a little bit of a deeper dive of what's on the website and the tools and resources there. So Karen, if you would walk us through some other tools and resources for our audience.
Definitely. We hope that you all will visit incentivefederation.org. It's a content-rich site with information not only about 274J, but other legislation that impacts the incentive marketplace. There's a feature now on the site that will help you contact your legislators to let them know why 274J should not be eliminated. Your legislators are listed there. You can find who they are by by state. Under the legislative awareness part of the website, we don't have a screenshot of it, but there are 3 different elevator speeches that you can use for content in terms of talking points for communicating not only with your legislators, but also your clients as well. I encourage you to take a look at those. As you can tell from the presentation that Michelle just made, the Incentive Federation and its members have done a yeoman's job in pulling together as much research and data as possible to make our business case. And that information is available to you on the website. As I said earlier, what is also extremely important is your support. The Federation is funded through membership fees, and that is the only way that the Federation derives its resources to retain our attorney, George Delta, to retain our lobbyist, Jim Miller. As you all know, lobbying is an expensive venture, and we do need every individual company's support that makes their living in the incentive marketplace. On the Incentive Federation website, you will be able to go to a section that says About Us or Join Now, and I think that's on the home page. And you will have all the information you need to pledge your support to the Incentive Federation. Every dollar that you pledge to the Incentive Federation as a member will be used for one of two purposes. It will be used to support the Incentive Federation's work of education and legislative awareness and research development, or our lobbying efforts. And so we encourage you to step up and make sure that your business and your clients' businesses are protected and help us with this effort.
Thanks very much, Karen. And you know, as we've been talking here, I want to also mention that the Federation has had over 100 meetings in the last couple of years with very influential members of Congress, both in the Senate and the Congress and the Treasury Department. So they're doing everything possible, but as Karen said, it's an expensive proposition, and I encourage you, you know, yes, there's a lot of activity, but that activity can only happen with your support. And if you have it in your heart, we invite you to even think about, you know, if you can make a $500 donation, that's $1.30 a day. So if you had one less Starbucks during the week, that would cover the $500, and what a priceless contribution that would be if we can continue to protect and defend 274J. I promise you it would cost you much, much more if, in fact, 274J went away for us. And even though it makes a lot of sense, and you heard that we have support of senators, there are going to be very hard decisions that will have to be made in the tax reform discussion. And it has got bipartisan support. Everybody wants to do tax reform. Clearly, each side of the aisle you know, wants to take the monies from, you know, different coffers. But if there is something like Simpson-Bowles that just take it all away, you know, we go with that. And that would be quite tragic. So we truly cannot let our guard down, and do want to ask for your support in any way that you can find it in your heart to support this. Now I want to thank our panel. You can see why I was so excited to have George and Karen. Hopefully you feel our industry is in very, very good hands with these exceptional leaders and the work and the efforts that they are doing. I want to thank Jay for having us, and the Recognition Council for hosting us. As Tracy mentioned earlier, this is recorded, so please do share with others that you feel should hear this message. And one of the other things to bring out on the website, there is an excellent 3-minute and 15-second video on the website that summarizes all of the challenges of 274J and the battle that we are facing. I would encourage you to view that and share that link. You know, again, 3 minutes and 15 seconds is not a long time. It's quick and to the point, but it's a great, great overview video that will be very helpful for you and others. So thank you on behalf of the Incentive Federation. And Jay, I will leave it to you for your closing comments and thoughts.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, do we have just time for one quick question from Sean Rourke?
But we can make time for Sean Rourke.
Okay. The question is, has there been any discussion of a Washington legislative visit campaign, perhaps in coordination with the summit?
I can speak to the activity around the summit. IMA's annual executive summit is taking place at the end of July in Washington, D.C., and we certainly are going to take advantage of that location. George Delta has graciously accepted our invitation to lead his legal Q&A sessions that we have been fortunate for he to present for the last several years. We've also invited our lobbyist, Jim Miller, to present and give us an update on what's happening in Washington. This will be towards the end of July. We'll all have more intelligence about what's happening with the election, and we've asked Jim to give us a scenario on what ifs. If the Republicans win the White House, what might we expect? If the Democrats retain the control of the White House, what might we expect? So it should be an interesting session, and we definitely will have an update. We are not planning, to my knowledge, a legislative visit at that time. We need to space and time these initiatives very, very carefully, and the end of July, we've been told, is not going to be an optimum time.
But to Sean's broader question, we are always looking and monitoring, and George and Jim are on the Hill all the time, and we look to them to guide us about when we need to be there. I think right now there's so much going on with the elections and campaigning and all of the drama of that we'd get a little buried. We're looking for a time where we would be able to hold their attention a bit more.
And we certainly do welcome the support of people who will join us on these legislative visits. We do want them to be members of the Incentive Federation so that we can position them in that way. And we will definitely make that information known in advance to our membership so that we can have full constituencies join us.
Okay, very good. Michelle, thank you so much for facilitating our session today. George, Karen, for serving as panelists, Tracy for organizing the webinar today. At the end of the session, all of the listeners will be receiving a brief survey, and we'd really appreciate your participation in that survey. And we just really thank you so much for your attendance today to learn more about this important issue before us. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.